Welcome to OnFinality's customer interview series, where we learn more from the leaders in the blockchain space and how OnFinality's infrastructure helps them build the decentralized future faster. I'm Rob, Head of Growth at OnFinality, and today it's my pleasure to have Thibault from Bifrost, a Web3 derivatives protocol, to join us for a chat on how they're using OnFinality's expertise in powering their staking protocol. Hey Thibault, great to meet you, and can you tell us more about Bifrost?
Hey Rob, nice to finally meet, and thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, of course. So as you mentioned, there's been sort of a change of terminology around liquid staking derivatives recently. So we've sort of adjusted to liquid staking tokens. So LSTs now, from the old pretty cool one, which was LSDs. But yeah, no, Bifrost is a substrate-based Kusama and Polkadot parachain, and we provide non-custodial, decentralized cross-chain liquid staking tokens to the staked assets. I guess, to give a bit of a context to the audience, we believe that POS systems have become a backbone to sort of the narrative that we're seeing nowadays, a backbone to DeFi as well, and what's being built on different layer ones and the different protocols. And we think that staked assets and their yield-bearing features are going to be very interesting and very important for sort of the next generation of the financial products which will take place in Web3. So we think liquid staking, and as we've noticed in the market recently, there's been a very strong narrative up to the Shanghai update, which is sort of imminent. It's been next month. And we're seeing there's a lot of growing alternatives to staking. And we fundamentally think that liquid staking solutions are going to be fundamental in the new era of DeFi and what's being built around that, in terms of capital efficiency, liquidity. And we just think that they're going to be a key tenant in ensuring a healthy and composable dynamic between sort of protocol security, protocol staking, and then where it gets really interesting is on the whole DeFi ecosystem and how people are building on top of these liquid staking tokens. So that's currently where we stand, and that's sort of our thesis.
Awesome. You mentioned, just maybe a bit of an aside, the Shanghai update coming up. Do you have a personal view on what's going to happen to all that ETH that becomes unlocked? I've seen a lot of people saying that people are going to relock it, and a lot of doomers as well saying it's just going to be this massive sell-off. Interested in what you think.
Yeah, I definitely think that we're in an interesting market in terms of sentiment and the different dynamics that we've seen since the beginning of the year in terms of market dynamics, market prices, and how certain projects, tokens have reacted. And there's different sort of narratives there. But related to the Shanghai update, I'm obviously of the view that there's going to be some sort of correction. There's going to be some users who are going to withdraw and perhaps take profit, if you like. But then again, it'd be interesting to see how that's then redistributed into the market and then how things take off. I think there's going to be an interesting play between the different liquid staking token protocols out there, the likes of Lido, who have a significant market share, and then the Frax ETH, who have a suite of products which are sort of interconnected. So we're going to see some interesting sort of market dynamics around market share redistribution, and then potentially how certain protocols are positioning around that. But from a user's perspective, I think a lot of them might sort of reassess where they stand in the market. So I think there's going to be some sort of volatility, some sort of market, but end of the day, I don't think it's going to be that significant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned a lot of things that are happening at the moment. One thing obviously is the SEC coming after stablecoins and even staking on Kraken in the US. And you see, Lido and other liquid staking providers get a massive pump, after that news. Does any of that affect, and you kind of alluded to it, any of your plans going forward?
The liquid staking derivative or LST narrative has obviously been quite beneficial for Bifrost. Obviously we lack the visibility of the likes of Lido, Rocket Pool, Frax, because as you know, we're very niche in terms of where we are right now in terms of the Polkadot ecosystem. But there's been a lot of interest coming towards Bifrost on that side, and hopefully, as we see things moving forward within Polkadot, different protocols within Polkadot, coming to fruition with their roadmaps and their protocols being built out, we're going to see some interesting dynamics around the utility, the use cases of XCM, which is really quite, I'd say, positive for Polkadot if everything goes right. But coming back to your question regarding the actual conditions, the regulatory ambiguity and stuff like that, obviously, we are confronted to these dynamics. I think there's obviously a good case for permissionless and decentralized protocols, which is good for us. But then again, when you are looking to sort of get user adoption, exposure, institutional coverage, which are the big tickets really in terms of volume and in terms of where things can go within the industry, that is sort of taking a step back. So we are seeing that there are KYC, AML sort of requirements around certain institutions looking at our solutions. And there's integrations as well, which have to take place, which are quite significant from an economics point of view. So there's really two factors. On the community side, we're getting a lot of exposure. And I think there's a good case for protocols like ourselves, which are decentralized and permissionless and non-custodial. But to the other side, where you're looking at sort of the big guys out there, depending on their nativeness and how they want to interact on chain, we're seeing some sort of friction there. And I think the big problem we're having as well is the regulatory framework is not clear, right? Kraken, took a hit. It's not a consequence of anything. They just decided, it was part of the ongoing discussions that were taking place. But when we see Coinbase, CBETH, which is their liquid staking protocol, a lot of people coming out now saying that liquid staking derivatives are actually not, securities in that sense. So that's why there's also this constant change of wording just to be, to be safe on that front. So it's going to be interesting to see how things play out. But regulatory scrutiny is bigger than ever after what happened last year, and we just have to be sort of really cautious.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what about given the current state of the market? In terms of liquidity, how's that affecting Bifrost and the things you can do at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. In terms of liquidity, as I said, when you're speaking to institutions, liquidity discussions are a bit more complicated when there's a given macroeconomic backdrop which is not favorable, which is risk off. However, when there's also regulatory scrutiny and pressure, it makes it even harder, and especially when sentiment is quite low. So liquidity discussions, I think, overall are quite fragile. And then specific to Polkadot, that's also something that we've seen. Liquidity is quite difficult within Polkadot. I think liquidity is siloed amongst parachains. Hopefully, we're going to be seeing a bit more sort of interoperability between protocols with XCM and liquidity being spread out with utility use cases taking place amongst parachains, which is really sort of the narrative I'm really sort of being really optimistic about this year. But liquidity discussions are always quite complicated, especially when you have these sort of market conditions.
Sure. You touched on Polkadot, and obviously, Bifrost has come from the Polkadot ecosystem. Can you share more about the cross-chain messaging, piece within there and why that's so important for you?
Yeah, it's definitely important for us because, we built strategically on Polkadot for that, for the tech, obviously for Substrate, in terms of the ease of development there and the runtime upgrades, which are seamless. But the whole idea of cross-chain is obviously not to rely on these, trusted bridges or whatever we've seen, sort of disappoint recently or in the past. So we are looking at these trustless interactions between parachains, which are done via XCM. And these are things which we're only seeing now because, XCM is only sort of coming to fruition. And, the latest updates as well. And parachains are now opening up, HRMP channels amongst parachains. And we're sort of trying to leverage off that. So, we're still very much in development phases. We are sort of looking to interact far more with XCM within sort of our product offering. We have some interesting, developments taking place, which hopefully will come to light within the end of this quarter. But XCM is really something which now has to be an important narrative for the Polkadot ecosystem around, trustless asset teleportation and communication between blockchains without having to go through a bridge.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And OnFinality also started within Polkadot, but we're now in multiple ecosystems. We just announced Polygon yesterday and ETH recently. And I noticed on your roadmap, thanks, that you're building bridges to Cosmos and ETH. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so we're not building bridges per se. What we're looking to do is we want to be a liquid staking token protocol hub, right? So we want to be niche within that sort of small angle of the industry, which means that currently, I mean, these are on our roadmap. We're still very much assessing the fees, how that can be achieved, but we are sort of waiting on sort of the solutions that come out in terms of trust as bridges. We had seen Snowfork, which is supposed to be come out with a trust as bridge between ETH and Polkadot within Q3 of this year, and that will allow us to move our VETH, which is our liquid staking token for ETH, to Polkadot. And then in terms of like the other ecosystems, we are working with Filecoin as well in terms of launching a liquid staking token there. But there again, there are developments which we're sort of looking at. Currently, it's multi-sig, which is not optimal, but we are working with third parties around these bridges. So they're currently on our roadmap, but given that technically, we're not going to sort of push these developments, we're going to wait on teams with their own expertise to build these sort of trust as communications among ecosystems. We're currently only focusing on Polkadot and trying to really work on the narrative around the utility and use cases of these liquid staking tokens, because there's a lot of work still on that front.
Sure. I noticed that Filecoin was there as well. What was the story behind that, or how does that come about?
Yeah, I mean, Filecoins has obviously been an interesting ecosystem. The storage providers, and we think that there's obviously a pretty big presence in Asia, and we had sort of a network. We had spoken to a lot of people within that community. It used to be quite big a couple of years ago, and then there was sort of a few sort of shutdowns and stuff, and now it's coming back to light. And we had discussed with a storage provider, which we have a relationship with, around potentially understanding what are the current constraints, capital efficiency constraints within sort of their network, and how that works between storage providers, lenders, and stuff like that. And we noticed that staking, and obviously the upgrade that's taking place within Filecoin with the Filecoin virtual machine, and smart contracts being deployed on Filecoin, there's going to be an interesting sort of use case around liquid staking. So that's sort of where it came about. We realized that there were certain barriers, and storage providers needed that. Different users within that ecosystem were in need of that as well, in terms of the lenders, centralized lenders, storage providers, and holders of Filecoin. And that's sort of where it came about. So it was more about finding sort of a problematic, and then seeing how our expertise can add value. And currently, where we stand on that front, without going into too much detail, we are looking to launch the liquid staking token for Filecoin within the next couple of weeks, once FVM is live on Filecoin.
So Bifrost is quite a technically challenging project. Can you share maybe some of the key challenges that you've had in the past few years and how you've overcome them?
Yeah, most definitely. I think the on the technical side, there was, I think the problem is more about as an ecosystem as a whole. So you have a solution. We initially started with liquid staking derivative for ETH, which was before being a parachain. We then became a Kusama parachain, one of the first 5 parachains on Kusama, where we were doing the liquid crowdloans, which I think was an interesting value proposition back then, when crowdloans were sort of very interesting compared to where we currently stand now with the whole crowdloan situation. And then we launched our liquid staking protocol in May of last year, once we had obtained a Polkadot parachain. So I think on the technical side, there was also the understanding of how XCM sort of can be part of that design, and how we can use it. So there was more of an understanding of XCM, and then its implementation within the solution. But now where we stand in terms of our challenges is twofold. Firstly, it's liquidity, which is something I referred to earlier, which is still not sufficient or large enough compared to other ecosystems. And there's also this idea about, we're dealing with situations or with narratives currently, which other ecosystems might face in the coming months or coming years. So I think people have had to be quite patient with Polkadot. And as I said earlier, I think parachains now are coming to light with their utility and value proposition. And we can now start seeing how that dynamic works amongst parachains. So these are really the challenges. It's the sentiment, the overall sentiment outside and inside Polkadot on the liquidity front, because you need liquidity as well to attract people to your product. You need liquidity to sort of push for utility, but then utility, you need use cases. And there are still certain things which I think you're looking at layer twos on for example, Arbitrum, where you're seeing a lot of interesting, DeFi protocols building on top. Whereas I think we're a bit different on protocol on the Polkadot side.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, great. The reason for us talking today also is that just to learn a little bit more about your relationship with OnFinality, and we've got a history of supplying scalable and reliable node and API infrastructure for Bifrost, so users can deploy nodes. Can you tell us more about your relationship with OnFinality and how that benefits builders in Bifrost?
Yeah, most definitely. So, I mean, how we came about to knowing OnFinality was quite clear because you're pretty much the leader in that term in terms of infrastructure, right? You're providing key infrastructure to the majority of Polkadot and Kusama parachains. So that was sort of a no-brainer in terms of when we wanted to strategically work with someone on that front. In terms of how we're currently using OnFinality, our services use OnFinality API from the DApp perspective and on the staking liquidity protocol data indexing side. And I mean, there's a number of number of benefits that we're clearly sort of really fortunate for on that front. I think it's always a question of mandating outsourced parties who have the expertise, allowing us to build and to do things that we're sort of focusing on. It's obviously helped us, mitigating sort of the barriers of entries, in terms of sharing Node API, and we've been able to sort of save costs, on the infrastructure side, but also on the node expansion side, which has been sort of really, really valuable. And I think in terms of the scalability has actually been really, really sort of key on that front as well, and redundancy in terms of outsourcing that and having an efficient process taking place. And on my ends, where I had sort of more of on the strategy side, I think there's been key valuable insights as well on the data front in terms of the queries and stuff, where I can sort of take a step back and look at who's creating the platform, the DApp, and then sort of relate that to my strategy and to things I'm doing going forward for Bifrost.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for the feedback. The guys have spent a lot of time lately, especially on the analytics front, trying to build out more and more features inside the app to make it more useful. So yeah, great to have that feedback. And I guess the same with Bifrost, that you're really an innovator in the space. What you did with the SALP protocol to help Polkadot users sort of leverage their tokens into the crowdloans and things like that. Can you tell us what's coming up, or what you're personally excited about in terms of either the liquid staking area or just DeFi in general?
Yeah, most definitely. I think, I mean, without going into too sort of, technical developments, I think what's going to be really interesting on our ends is how we're going to sort of use XCM as part of the key value proposition of our liquid staking tokens on that front. And we're going to see much more use cases of our liquid staking assets within other protocols on Polkadot and Kusama. So, I mean, we're currently working on an XCM action palette for V-token sort of communications between Bifrost and other parachains, which I think is going to be really interesting, both EVM compatible and substrates. And what that will allow, if you like, is the integration of functionalities for cross-chain liquidation. So, lending and borrowing V-tokens, which are our liquid staking tokens on other parachains, which will be really key for sort of V-token utilities and use cases. And on another point, the staking liquidity protocol SDK development. So what will that mean is you'll be able to deploy a contract calling sort of XCM action palette, minting and redeeming and swapping the V-tokens natively on a parachain's network, which will mean that the V-token being minted there will be part of their TVL. So there's some interesting things that we're deploying on that front. And we are also sort of pushing forward with a sort of a builders program initiative where people can come forward and provide sort of their expertise and their views in terms of where V-tokens, should be sort of deployed, and in terms of how we could leverage off, V-tokens being a fundamental pillar within DeFi, and what people have in terms of their views of how that can be brought forward from a sort of technical perspective and builder's perspective, and looking to reward them on that front. So a bit like a grant. So that's typically what we're really, really, really excited about this year in terms of pushing XCM.
Awesome, really neat. Last question. I think you've got a background in hedge funds, if I'm not mistaken. And I was wondering, do you have any advice for people coming from Web 2 or even outside of crypto completely and want to get into this crazy game?
Yeah, I don't know. Come into this crazy game for sure, but try and make it as healthy as possible. Do enjoy like taking some breaks and valuing sort of what's happening in the real world. I think that's probably the key insight I have to give. But yeah, I mean, my background's in TradeFi, so FX. But I think no, I think the key here is, I mean, we're in DeFi, so it's quite specific. But I think overall is, if you have some skills, some key skills which you think are valuable, and you think that you have a specific premise in terms of where things are potentially going in terms of industry movements, or what could potentially happen in the next couple of years, when there's that transition between Web 2 and Web 3. I think it's important to sort of dip your toes in it, understand what's going on from a sort of very easy, superficial basis, and then sort of dive into more details in regard to what you're particularly interested in, and then understanding sort of the basics of the technology around it, and then just diving in and doing as much reading as you want once you found that sort of that area of interest. But I think it's a difficult area because it's obviously constantly innovating. There's constantly things going on left and right, but I definitely think that it's becoming more and more important to at least start looking at what's happening in Web3, because that's where most people are moving into in terms of like companies to people who have skills within a niche sector.
Absolutely. And I think DeFi is the most obvious thing for most people in terms of what they can kind of touch and understand, right? It's just inevitable that all of these solutions will be everywhere as long as the regulators don't hurt it too much. But thanks, Thibault. Really awesome learning more about Bifrost and liquid staking. If you'd like to learn about Bifrost, you can check out their website, which we'll put in the description. And if you're a Web3 builder and want to get stuck in, you're at the right place. OnFinality is blockchain infrastructure made smarter. You can check out our website at app.onfinality.io and run infrastructure for Bifrost perhaps, or take your own app to the next level with all of our different analytics and other services. So yeah, thanks for having been on here today again, Thibault, and all the best.
Thanks again, Ron. Have a good one. Take care. Bye.
Okay, cheers. See you.